Greetings. So today I'm going to talk about finances. Basically, how you could probably make more money, how to handle your money, how to protect your money, different things like that. Because I look back on my, I'll say career, but I'll go with that. Because I started out working in hospitals. Actually, before then, I was doing all kinds of things, trying to make certain money. I started working at a music store. And back then I was making $3.25 an hour, and that was considered kind of a fair amount to make at the time. So that's freaky. And then when I first started working in a hospital, I was making $3.95 an hour. And then I kept getting promoted. Then for a while, I was a manager of a medical billing organization located in the Syracuse area. Then I worked at another hospital in Rome, New York, where I got more money, and that lasted for a while. Then I ended up having to work at a health center here in the Syracuse area because luckily I knew somebody who knew someone else, and they contacted the employment people there, and I got to work there. That worked out pretty well. And then I got my first pretty good paying job, which was becoming a director at a hospital that was about 45 minutes away normally, because there were times where we had snowstorms. That was miserable. Still, that worked out well. I was there for 6.5 hours. And then our hospital merged with a hospital in Rochester. And I had to find other ways to make money. Wrote a book, wrote some articles, started calling all kinds of people who I had met at certain organizations, and that ended up becoming basically an independent consultant. So I worked, I'll say 6 months in New Jersey, and that was kind of fun. It was also kind of freaky, but at least I could get on the boat so I could go across to Manhattan, and I loved that. And then I worked, God, what was after that? Oh, I did a project in another hospital, and then I did a better project where I worked in Westchester County, and I made a bunch of money on that one. And then I traveled to Hazleton, North Dakota. That was interesting. That was interesting. Did something in Reno, Nevada, a couple other different things. Then got a job working in Harlem at a hospital there, but they put my hotel in Manhattan, which I wasn't upset. A different restaurant every single night. I was not upset with that. And then I think the last good job I had was 18 months working in Memphis at a hospital system there. So that worked out well. And then I had to take care of my mother when that ended because then mom got sick. So I had to start doing certain other things. And, I can tell you right now, over the course of time, I actually earned more than $1 million. That was just pretty lucky of me. What I never knew how to do is really how to save money, how to put money away for a rainy day, how to deal with certain other things that happened that had nothing to do with me, and then certain things that had to do with me. And it was just a mess. So what I want to do is I want to talk to those of you who might have an opportunity to work for yourself, or maybe you have a good paying job, or even if you don't really have a good paying job, different ways that you can handle your money, even if you need help to learn how to do it, so that you can protect yourself when you get older. Because here's one of those things that I didn't know about at the time. During those times when I was self-employed, I didn't have any money going into Social Security. All the money that I had that went to Social Security were all the jobs. So all the hospitals I worked at, they, paid me money, and then that went to the Social Security. I never thought anything about it. It never occurred to me. I didn't have an accountant at that time, So I didn't know that. And then when I was traveling doing all this work early on, I got an accountant, but I never thought to ask her about Social Security. It just never occurred to me until later. I'll get back to that. So I've got 7 items here. And just to let you know, come here, piece of paper. Look, 7 things. And I'm going to mention these 7 things. I'm going to talk about why you probably need these 7 things. And I hope that some of these things will help you. So let's find out. The first thing is to get an accountant. Now, here's the thing. Remember those boxes? Because I don't think they have them everywhere anymore these days, but you used to have TurboTax, and there were all these other different, boxes, and you could go to a store and you could buy these boxes, you could take it home, and you could do your taxes on your own. Now, that works well when you're not working, when you're not earning a bunch of money, but you might get some tax breaks if you find an accountant. Accountants do a lot of different types of things, but one of the things they're big on, obviously, is your Social Security, not your Social Security, your taxes, your national taxes, which actually ends up being part of the Social Security and all these other kinds of things. So I ended up getting an accountant, but it took me a while. And what happened is that I had made all this money. I thought I was doing good. I was using some of that money to take care of the house. When we bought the house, it needed a lot of things taken care of. So we did that. We painted the house. We got new windows in certain places. We did all this other kind of stuff. And then I got something from the IRS saying that I owed a ton of money that I wasn't expecting. And then I set up a deal to pay them back. And then I got a second thing because, once again, I was still working out of town and I got hit with another one. So I contacted my accountant and she said, we need to incorporate you because you're making, this big amount of money. And if you make an accountant, then you don't have to pay anything to the IRS for that. I said, okay, yes, let's do that, which sounds good. But it also means that you're not really doing anything with your money. And I ended up having to get incorporated. And I had a book, but that was safe. At least that protected me for a while. But I never thought to ask any questions about, the incorporation, what I needed to do with that. So get an accountant. It's easier that way. You will probably get some money back. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this year, it's the first time I got money back in a long time. Because not going to go there. I got money back. And then I got some other money back because New York State has what they call a STAR system. If you're over 65 and you live in an area where there's a school, then you get some money back. And this year I got that. So I was ecstatic. So anyway, the first thing I'm going to recommend is you think about getting an accountant. We're past that now, but you at least have almost an entire year to get an accountant, someone to actually help you take care of your money. Now, the second thing is to invest some of your money. So find a legitimate broker. Now, what happened is that when I got this gig, when I first got my gig, and then I knew I needed to talk to my accountant because even though I was making some money, I wasn't making the big money. And her thought was, you know what, you need to get somebody who starts to invest your money. So she knew some people. And I hooked up with these 2 guys who worked in the same building, the same business. And, we came up with something. I had, enough money so that I could invest a certain amount of money with them. And that started doing, pretty good. So when I was done having to pay the IRS, I now had some extra money. I didn't look at it on a monthly basis. For a while, they were coming every 6 months. And then I didn't hear from them. And I didn't think about it. And I had a finance blog that I was writing. I was writing all these different things. And there were banks that were closing everywhere. and all other kinds of things. And I started wondering, wait a minute, I haven't heard anything about my money going to one of the investment accounts. And I can't remember the name of the company that they put it in, but I called them. I said, yeah, I've got this thing here. I know I've got some money with you guys, but I don't know how much I have. I was around $12,000, and then I haven't heard anything. So I spoke to the broker, and the broker, looked it up and came back and said, right now you have 2,100. Hey, what happened to the money? Well, because there was a stock crash in the late 2000s. And so I had lost a whole bunch of money. And had I known that earlier, had I known that that was something I should have done, I could have called my accountant, which I eventually did. And she said, I haven't heard from them in a while either. It turns out they had closed their business because once everything was going down, people didn't want to talk to anybody who was investing their money. And then they shut their business and they went somewhere. That doesn't mean that there aren't some people who are still good at it. For instance, my accountant. She grew her business to a point where not only did they do accounting things, but they offered financial assistance. They had another part of it. So she hired a couple of people who helped other people to do that kind of thing. And, I'm proud of her because she really built that thing up great. So, you've got to think about it. You might find ways where you don't have to spend, you don't have to invest a ton of money on a monthly basis, although it doesn't hurt to see how much you can, put into something like that and still have enough money to, pay your bills, eat, occasionally go to a movie, whatever. So it helps to have someone else to talk to who can make these kinds of issues or, types of things to think about so that you can at least be calmer. Because I didn't know any of that stuff. So there's that. Number 3, find ways to earn extra money. So one of the things that I had during those time periods when I wasn't working the big paying jobs was trying to find other ways to work. I built a lot of websites for a lot of different people. I wrote blogs for them. I wrote articles for their websites. And then I would write, create blogs for them. And then I would write those things for them. And I got paid on a monthly basis from those folks. And I can't say that I made tons of money, but I was making some money. And I had at one point, I think 11 or 12 different people. And they liked what I was doing. One of those things that I can say I was good at was writing. I'd written all kinds of things over all these years, so I could at least do that. I knew how to build websites. I can't say that I was a great designer because I don't know all the colors. Even now, I have 3 blogs right now and a business website, which I'm going to be shutting down. That'd be for another time. But I could at least do that job. I found a lot of people who wanted to, hire me to write articles on different topics. I had another guy who had me writing about houses. That lasted for 2.5 years. That wasn't so bad. And like I said, in other words, I was making some kind of money. I wasn't making the money that I was making when I was working at a hospital out of town, but I was still making money. And that didn't hurt. That helped a lot. I was not worried that I wasn't going to be able to get anything. It's a little harder these days as times have changed, but it's something to think about. What ways can you, find to make money? One of the wildest things, live in Central New York, we have people who will drive around and cut lawns during the summer, and then we have people who will plow your driveway during that time period. And they charge a lot of money. So I haven't paid any of those people for that. I now have a snowblower, so that works out. And one of my next door neighbors cuts my lawn every 3 weeks. And during the first half of the summer, I will get them a gift card from the store. And it's usually at least between $150 to $200. And then I give them the same thing when that season is over. So at least that you're trying something with me. I was actually I was putting money away so that I could buy a lawnmower of some kind. And then let's just say that I had some issues. Ended up having a washing machine because the one I had for 20 years decided it was going to start flooding the floor in the laundry area. That wasn't going to get done. Then I had to pay another $1,800 for a tree that fell in my backyard about 5 feet away from the house. And I couldn't let it sit there because I didn't want animals being that close to the house. If they want to stay back in the woods, fine. I didn't want them that close in the house. And all kind of critters are out there, so I didn't want to do that. Those kinds of things come up from time to time. That's talking about what I was saying, find ways to save money, earn extra money and then save some money because you never know what's going to happen. Life insurance. Life insurance is something that a lot of people probably don't think about these days. I will put it this way. Rich people will think about life insurance because they, have financial advisors of all kinds. And one of the things they'll say is get life insurance. It was a fluke for me to think about getting life insurance. I was married. We had this house. I had other things kind of going on and I was worried about it. And she had a different financial advisor. I didn't trust him, but still, she had a different financial advisor. And then she says, hey, you should probably think about doing something with a will. I didn't initially do that, but I found out that my dad had a will when he had passed away, and then my mother had a will. So I decided I need to get a will. So I went to a place downtown, and it only cost me $600. That wasn't bad. And I have beneficiaries listed on that. I don't have any kids. I don't have any namesakes. So 90%. Okay, I have the will. I have one person listed under the will, and she's going to get whatever this house is sold for. She's getting that. And then I've got the life insurance, and she's getting 90% of that. And then I have another niece. None of them are blood related, but still, that's just how I feel about them. So life insurance will cover that, and they will have something. And I just wanted to make sure that, some folks are going to be there because, when I pass away, and if I'm still in this house, who's going to take care of it? So, that's why I needed to do that. That's something you really have to think about if you're living in a house. If you're by yourself, you should probably think about that. My neighbor across the street, it's a shame in the fact that when she and her husband moved in, and they were right across the street, he was only alive for 2 months before he passed away. And luckily, he had set up a whole lot of stuff so that, she could grieve and then she could figure out what she had to do after that. He had a will and he left certain information for her so that she could talk to somebody. So she's doing well. She's got, she's not super rich, but she has enough money so that she didn't have to go to work and she's relaxed. And then she calls me every once in a while to go over and help her out with her computer stuff. But still, that's life. So, get some life insurance. It's a smart thing to do to protect your family and your friends if you need that kind of thing. Then I put down, get a planner. Now, I showed you this piece of paper, but what I haven't shown you, at least now, is that I also have a planner. And, Lord, come here, you. This is my planner for this year, Passion Planner. And I decided last year, actually at the end of last year, I decided that I needed to have some kind of planner so I can put things together. Because I have been looking about, I've talked about finding other ways to make money, other ways to take care of finances and whatever. And writing it down on a piece of paper doesn't always get it done. So I have a planner. And that's one of those things that helps me stay focused. on what I do with it. I don't write in it every week like I did when I was looking for different types of work. I wasn't doing it because I needed all kind of motivation, which I used. I have a bunch of these things that I need to get rid of. But it helps to have a planner. If something comes up, you can write it in a certain place. The planner I have has it by the month, a week of every single month for the year. They have all kinds of different things like that. I like the Passion Planner because it just, it gives me the feels. But they have the Franklin Covey planner. And that was just super expensive. It was super big. This is so much easier to use. But having a planner makes sense. Now, you can do it a different way. You can set up something on your computer if you have Excel or some other kind of thing, and you can do it there. But a planner doesn't hurt. So that's my thought. Number 6, if you're self-employed, think about being incorporated. So I mentioned that earlier, that when I got these bills from the IRS saying they needed all this money from me, it was my lawyer who said, we need to get you incorporated because you need to have a way to protect yourself. So I did that. She hooked me up with this guy, and I had him for what? Well, basically I had him for, I think it was 12 years or so, maybe 13. But he was the guy who was there. He was the lawyer. I didn't have to pay. I had to pay him to set it up, but then I hadn't had to pay him for the longest time. Then the federal government decided it was going to change some things, and this was under Biden, so I can't use that against the guy who's in office right now. But they said that they needed, you had to fill out certain information every year if you're incorporated, and it was going to cost you about, $200 or so. So I called my advisor, and he said, yeah, actually, I read that also because I wrote an article for that for my accountant. And he said, do you still need to be incorporated? I said, no, I don't think so. I'm not going to be traveling like that anymore. That was just way too tiring. So no, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. He says, I still have your binder, right? I said, yeah, I brought the binder to you. He said, okay, here's the thing. If you want me to hold the binder, it's going to cost you $750 a year. And if you don't want me to handle it, then you need to come get it. I don't even know why you brought it to me. I said, because I had read something where it said that you should give it to your lawyer. So I did that. So it's somewhere in the house right now. I'm not sure which room. I have 5 rooms in the house. So it's in a different room, but I got it back. However, if you're incorporated, you can do it for yourself. You can actually have an accountant for, if you're not making tons of money, but if you're doing okay. For instance, there's a guy who, what did he do for work? I can't remember exactly what he did for work, but, he was earning maybe $25,000, $30,000 a year. And, he was happy with that. He had some other money for something else. Okay, that was easy enough to go through just using an accountant for that. With the money I had been making at the time, it worked better to have a lawyer to, take care of me as a just-in-case backup. So it's something to think about. I don't think that everyone needs to be incorporated. If you're working for someone else, you definitely don't need to be incorporated. But if it's just you and you're making a whole bunch of money, think about getting incorporated or finding other ways to, have a financial planner, someone that you can give that money to so they're investing for you. I don't know if Warren Buffett's available, but if you can get him, he's the best. And I think that's probably the last one. I mean, I have number 7 where I said find a financial advisor, but that's tough. Like I said, I don't trust any of the big investment companies, so I'm not going that direction. I'm not in a position right now where I need a financial advisor. What I do, though, is I've learned to, because of all these years, I've learned things. So I make less money. I get paid every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, I take $40 out of that and I put it in my bedroom somewhere. And at a certain point, if I wanted to, I could put it in a savings account at the bank, but I don't want to do that. But it helps so that if something comes up and it doesn't overwhelm me, that may be a good start. Like I said, I wouldn't have had enough money laying around to pay the $1,800, Lord. But at least I, have certain money so that I can use that. When the price of gas went up, all of a sudden I needed to reduce that a little bit because, the gas here at the time was $2.24 a gallon. Right now, in the town I live in, it's It's $4.52 a gallon. But in places in the city, it's between $5 and $5.75 per gallon. And in some of the other states, it's as much as $7 or $8 a gallon. That's a mess. But if I needed the money for that, then I would be covered. Luckily, I work 3 days a week. I drive 3 days a week. I have to fill up the car at least twice a week, where, I used to only have to do it twice a week, being able to still drive around and go to a lot of other places. Now, if I go somewhere else, if I decide to go to Texas Roadhouse or Olive Garden or whatever, you know what? I'm filling that up a third time. And sometimes I go to BJ's because it's a little cheaper, but also it's like, okay, that's a 6-minute drive there, 6-minute drive back home. So, it's just something to think about. Anyway, those are the 7 tips that I have for some kind of financial thing. I hope that works for you. I'm going to list all of the titles that I had down here so that if you want to look at it later on, you will see, the order that I put them in. And, I'm going to wish the best for all of y'all. I've been able to survive it. It hadn't been easy. I'm not going to lie. I've had some tough times over the last, 15 years. Some of those times was big financial money, but other times I just ran into some stuff because I didn't know any of that. Dad worked at Xerox. They helped him. Dad was in the military. They helped him. I had none of that, and it never occurred to me to ask anybody about it. So that's just my life. Anyway, my name is Mitch Mitchell. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you the next time I put one of these things out. Y'all take care.